You're listening to the Sonny Brown Breakdown. Now, it is time to break it down.
Welcome to episode number 58 of the Sonny Brown Breakdown. I'm your host, Sonny Brown, and in this episode, I talk to Mittmaster Matt Chapman. He's been a martial artist for 35 years and has a wealth of experience instructing Jeet Kune Do, kickboxing, Muay Thai, and MMA, and he provides some great insights into how nurturing and caring for martial artists and new students can help their development, keep them in the sport, help them master the art. So it's very interesting, that take on just caring for new students, which we get into, and also his development of the Mittmaster pad training system, which he's well known for, his MMA Padwork, kickboxing Padwork, and how he kind of combines that all together. So hope you enjoy the episode. If you'd like to support the podcast, you can get a t-shirt at scuffle.com.au. You can also leave a review on iTunes or Spotify. And if you'd like to send some feedback, it's sunnybrown@gmail.com or on Instagram at sunnybrownbreakdown. Now, without further ado, let's go to the podcast. G'day, Matt. How are you today, mate?
I'm really good. Just finished a good day teaching some private lessons today, doing a bit of work online. Been a nice day. How about yourself?
Not too bad at all. Start of the day for me. So what a better way to start the day than having a chat with the Mittmaster himself, Matt Chapman. I want to start things off. I give a shout out to Dennis Kelly out at ACSA down in Melbourne, who'd also previously been on the podcast. He was actually the person who turned me on to your work. I saw him online doing a couple of interesting MMA pad drills, notably, I think it was dirty boxing drills and some ground and pound drills. And I asked him some questions about it, and he said, I've been looking at this Mittmaster fellow, and he's got a bunch of good drills for pads. So then I've checked out your stuff, and it's very interesting because it's a underdeveloped area, I would say, of mixed martial arts, or perhaps even underutilized. And I think we can have a good conversation about that and some of the intersections of different styles that you've covered. So just want to start off just by asking you, I know you've got a background in Jeet Kune Do and mixed martial arts and Thai boxing, Filipino boxing, I believe. So I just want to ask about your background in martial arts and how you got into, in particular, linking up with Erik Paulson.
So I started martial arts after seeing Bruce Lee in Enter the Dragon, classic sort of my generation sort of thing, you know. Saw Bruce Lee doing his thing. I was like, I got to do that. That's amazing. Couldn't find any kung fu near where I was living. I was about 10 or 11 at that time. But I did find a ninjutsu school. So I went off to be a ninja and I did ninjutsu for a decade. That was very cool when you're that age because we did some crazy stuff. We used to do things like firing bow and arrow off of horseback and throwing stars and using a blowpipe and infiltrating buildings at night, like proper ninja stuff. So I was just loving that stuff. That was amazing. Some kind of 11 until sort of 20, I was just doing ninjutsu. And then we had a karateka come to the school and he wanted to do some sparring. And I was like, sure, let's do some sparring. And then he just proceeded to just beat me up, slap me around the head with his feet, kick me all over the dojo. And I was like, okay, this sucks. So I started then looking at different sort of combat systems and fighting sports to see if I could improve my sparring. And that led me to kind of Jeet Kune Do approach. I read Bruce Lee's Tao of Jeet Kune Do, found it in a bookshop. I was like, it's the Bible. So I just consumed that and went for all the drills and practiced it, and eventually found an instructor near me called Anton St. James, who was a Muay Thai instructor, a Wing Chun instructor, and also a Filipino martial arts instructor. And I spent about a decade training with him in those different systems. And he recommended that I travel to London to train with a guy called Bob Breen, who is considered like the godfather of JKD in Europe, one of the first guys to get Guru Danana Santo over, one of the first guys to open up a JKD school. Started as a traditional karateka and then changed everything and went into JKD. So I spent 5 years training at Bob Breen's Academy, amazing place full of absolute killers and beasts. And Bob was the first person to invite Erik Paulson over to the UK. So Bob invited Eric. We didn't know anything about Eric at that time. We were just like, this guy does bare knuckle MMA, because he was doing bare knuckle MMA back at that time. We were like, okay, sounds pretty cool. So Eric came over and he just blew my mind, because he was so skillful at all ranges of combat and linking them together so fluidly. Like, his transitions were amazing. His stand up was great. His clinch was great. His takedowns were amazing. He had amazing submissions for the time. This was like 20 years ago. So we were like, wow, okay, we've got to go and train with Eric. So I then traveled over to the USA a couple of times, 2 or 3 times, to train with Eric at his CSW center in Los Angeles, and just absorbed everything he was teaching me about combat submission wrestling, Shuto, and early MMA. Eric was still fighting. This was around about the beginning of the first few UFCs, so it was really early in MMA's history. And then after a while of training MMA, it started to come over to the UK. There were no cages in the UK originally. It was all fought in rings. So I was fighting at a time very early in the MMA boom where it's still called no holds barred or cage fighting. So that's how far ago that was. Early days. No cages. So I used to fight in rings, which is interesting and has its own set of problems, especially when you fall out of the ring. But I had a fair few MMA fights. I didn't really enjoy MMA fighting that much, but I loved the training of MMA and learning the different combinations and the takedowns and blending it all together. That was my real passion. So that's kind of how I met Eric, and I've been his MMA student ever since. He's been my only MMA coach, essentially.
That's interesting. With the legalization of the cage in the UK, we went through something similar here in Australia, where some states had it allowed and then some states were a holdout. Around when did that get legalized, and was it a big deal for it to happen? How much pushback were you guys getting there?
No, I don't think it was a legalization issue in the UK. It was because no one could afford a cage originally. So I don't think it was I wasn't aware that there's any sort of, you're not allowed a cage, it's not legal. It was more that we couldn't get one to the UK. It would require shipping it from the US, I assume, or shipping it from somewhere like Brazil. So fight promoters couldn't afford to get a cage. So we were all fighting out boxing rings in the early days. Eventually, we started to get cages over, and it all started to take off and got more and more popular, because a lot of the crowd kind of didn't understand what they were watching if we were in a boxing ring, because they thought it'd either be like maybe boxing or Muay Thai or kickboxing. And then when the takedowns happened and the ground and pound was happening, people were shouting things like "get up" and all that sort of, get off the ground, this sucks, that. Early days MMA. So eventually the promoters managed to bring in the cages, and then the fights continued from that point on.
Gotcha. Interesting. So it was really just, it was too early to warrant any promoter to spending the money on the cages yet. They had the rings there. Let's just do it in the ring instead. Yeah, I mean, Pride style as well, which is fine.
Yeah, well, Pride style is awesome. But obviously no soccer kicks, no stomps, no Vanderlei Silva crazy-esque techniques, just basic unified MMA rules. But it's an interesting time. It's really early. People who are doing this at that time were kind of stylists. So you'd have like a Muay Thai guy versus a Jiu-Jitsu guy, or a kickboxer versus a boxer. It was really early, like the kind of early UFCs where it was style versus style. Luckily, me and my training partner, James, we were being trained by Eric at that point. So we had quite a good system. Well, we had a great system behind us, but we could blend the techniques together quite well. So we were not particularly any one style or the other. We could transition between the styles quite well. So it's an interesting time. Yeah, really, really early. And obviously that's, now it's huge. 15, 16, 17, 20 years later, it's massive. But back then it was like you were fighting in really small sports centers, really small, there was no money in it. It wasn't looked upon as something you would do. Most traditional martial artists looked down on it. Most normal people thought it was like pit fighting, cage fighting, bear baiting, human cockfighting, whatever they used to call it. So, it's come a long way.
Yeah, most certainly. And you mentioned there the training with Eric Paulson, himself training with the Shudo system or the Shudo style. And that really was, as you mentioned, one of the first complete systems of fighting to be developed and then taught and around the world, obviously coming from Japan. One of the things that I know that Eric does well is his use of what he calls templates from different positions, which is basically he'll get to certain positions, whether it be on the ground, in the clinch, standing, and he'll say, here's the template for it.
Yeah.
Here are the 5 different options or something like that. You know, was that present when you were training with him, and how much of that is still present, do you believe?
Yeah, it was. I think because Eric has obviously come through the Inosanto system, and the Inosanto system is JKD system is very structured and has, sequences, templates, lists of techniques that need to be performed. He's kind of taken that into the MMA. So Eric's super organized and structured with his curriculum, and everything is, you need to know this at this particular level and that at this particular level. Obviously for fighting it's a bit different, but he has like a grading system for MMA and for his combat submission wrestling and for BJJ. So it's very structured. I like that approach to teaching martial arts. I like to know what I need to know to be of a certain level of skill, and what are the requirements and what are the techniques that I need to drill and work on. So he's always got masses of notebooks on him and lists he's written out and combinations, and he teaches at seminars and workshops in that way. And he teaches, at least when I trained with him 20 years ago, a lot, he would be very organized with what we were teaching, and everything was structured and systematized. And I really like that, because I have trained with some instructors where it's just, they kind of almost make it up on the fly. They're like, okay, so now we're going to do this, and then we're going to do that, and then we're going to do something else. And it's kind of a bit of a mismatch of different techniques. And I like the way Eric's really systematic and compartmentalized with how he teaches.
Interesting. So obviously the systematic way of then teaching does make it a lot easier for the students to learn and pick up things and become familiar with positions. But is that correct then? I heard you say that it was really more the influence of Jeet Kune Do and the systematic teachings of the Inosanto style that influenced that, because my knowledge of Jeet Kune Do I'd probably describe as a tourist view. I've, aware of Bruce Lee, read the Tao of Jeet Kune Do, but I'm not really that familiar with the current teaching practices or how the whole system works in practice now.
Obviously, you'd have to ask Eric
Sure.
to get the actual truth, but that's my impression. Obviously, he also trained Shuto with Yuri Nakamura, and he trained with the Gracies in the early days as well. So he's just been exposed to like top level martial artists, grapplers, strikers. He's trained with some of the best people in the world and trained some of the best people in the world. So I think it's just a combination of possibly all those elements coming together. Obviously, the JKD influence, they tend to be very structured. In my JKD training, there's a lot of stuff from lists. It's like you're learning the 5 variations of this, the 10 variations, 6 techniques in this set. So I think that's played an influence. The drills he showed me from Shuto tended to be really structured as well. Like Shuto, for example, is one of the first systems that really, at least I found, had sequences of lock flows. I didn't really learn a lot of that when I started jiu-jitsu. It would be maybe takedown to position to control to improving the position to setting up the submission, and that would be kind of the finish. But in Shuto, you've got lock flows that have 15, 20 moves that are like go to this lock, to this lock, to this lock, to this lock. And I think that's maybe also part of where he gets that sequencing from. So you'd have to speak to Eric though to get the full story. Of
course. And yeah, good point too, because of course Shudo, those lock flows, as you mentioned, some great stuff that they do with that, and just, run through so many submissions from a particular position. And I do think that it's almost like that, it was very early on when they were doing that, but it's almost like tailor-made for Instagram and social media now, where they just hit so many submissions in a row, little ahead of its time.
yeah, exactly. But also it's training you to maybe not think you're going to get the first submission, because, you might get the armbar, but what happens if they move into a different position? Then you've got the triangle, then you've got the sweep into, the omoplata. So I think it all relates. Maybe you wouldn't go 15 locks in before you tap them, but it's sequences, isn't it? And in jiu-jitsu, there's the same sequences, triangle, armbar, omoplata, or kind of a triple free sequence that jiu-jitsu practitioners run through. So same sort of thing, but I liked the structure, and I liked also, obviously, that Shuto had a lot of leg locks, which were not particularly popular in jiu-jitsu 20 years ago, at least in the jiu-jitsu I trained 20 years ago. That wasn't taught that much. We were learning heel hooks and toe holds and knee cranks and knee bars right from the beginning, which was useful.
Yeah, definitely. Some of those early leg lock flows show a lot of moves or a lot of finishes that are very common nowadays. And of course, setups and entries have been improved and innovated upon, but the finishes themselves, a lot of them can be seen in those early Shudo flows, which I do find fascinating just as a, historical point of view, right?
Yeah, there's nothing new under the sun, really, is there? You can see leg locks in ancient Greek architecture and sculptures and stuff. So it's just how you put it together, maybe, that's different. And Shuto is, because of its system, I think, very fluid in how it chains its submissions together. I really like that about Shuto. It's an interesting art, and Eric kind of took it to the next level, I think, once he was competing in MMA, because he did obviously bare knuckle MMA, but he also then went into MMA with gloves on, and was one of the pioneers back in the day, bringing MMA to the masses, really.
Definitely. And so then with that background that you had, when did you start moving into the coaching side of things? And how did you first start making that transition and then implementing some of this structure that you had as a background into your own teachings?
Yeah, so I was doing a degree in sports science, and I was kind of faking a degree in sports science. So I came to London in order to do a degree, but really I was trying to train with lots of different instructors. So I was training at Bob Breen's academy. I was training some kickboxing instructors, and I was training one of the first jiu-jitsu coaches who came to the UK, called Chen, many decades ago. So that was pretty cool to be there right at the beginning of that kind of introduction of jiu-jitsu into the UK. But the real reason I was in London was to train. So I finished my degree, and I was like, well, I can either try and get a job in a gym, being a fitness coach or something like that. And I thought, nah, screw that. So I'm going to teach martial arts, because that's what I really love. Because by this point, I've been doing martial arts 10, 12, 15 years. So opened up a school, started small, started in like halls and church halls and sports centers and things like that. It started to grow, found a full-time location, and then kind of spent the next 19, 20 years teaching full-time, just helping normal students get fit, training fighters for kind of Muay Thai and kickboxing bouts, training MMA fighters, and just immersing myself in that whole kind of teaching world, which luckily for me, I've always had great coaches. So they were always very open-minded. They never stopped me training with other people. It was never like, no, you cannot train with him. It was always like, yeah, go away, do what you want, come back when you're ready, which is, it's still even rare in some circles today, that you don't go and train at other schools. But all my coaches were like, yep, go and research your own experience and find your own way. So that was great. So I kind of brought that to my school. But also all my instructors have had really structured teaching plans, really structured curriculums and lessons. So I found if I used those, I taught better classes, and the school grew quite quickly. We got to about 400 members, and it kind of stayed at about that for a decade. So it was good. Yeah, good times.
Excellent to hear. I'm wondering then, with the running of the school, and particularly with structure, one of the biggest things where structure can be important is, of course, for beginners and people coming into martial arts school for their first time. What kind of structure would you lay out for them? And, what do you think are the most important parts for beginners to have under their belt and look to a structure to provide them?
That's a deep question. How long you got? You got a couple of hours?
It's deep.
So
let's do it.
How many times I've walked into so many martial arts schools in my life, and often the first thing that happens is everyone ignores you. So it's just like, it does my head in. I've walked into schools. I've had people have been training. I've stood by the door, like no one's come talk to me. People are continuing to train. And you just stood there for about 5 minutes, and you sit down, and eventually 15 minutes later, the instructor comes over after he's finished beating someone up and is sweaty and a mess and introduces themselves. So I'd say the very first thing is kind of expect your beginners to turn up and then greet them as quickly as possible, because I'm used to that. I'm used to martial arts. I know what we are like. But for people who are not used to martial arts, it's an intimidating environment. So they go into that environment, they're like shit scared anyway. And then you don't greet them, you don't help them out, you don't get them started, you don't welcome them warmly. And that's no reason, that's why people quit even before the first session. I've seen people come into a gym, kind of be left, not sure what's going on, and leave a gym and never return. So they didn't even get a chance to try martial arts. So first things first is like actually welcome people to your gym and be friendly and try and encourage them to come in. And then I think the second thing is it's really important that you don't overwhelm beginners with too much technical information, because for beginners, their two biggest fears are getting hurt and looking stupid. And if you try and make them do loads of combinations and difficult stuff, they instantly feel like they're looking stupid. Everyone else in the class can do it. They can't do it. So then they're feeling self-conscious and they're stressing out, and then they're feeling this sucks, martial arts sucks, and they don't come back again. So, instructors across all styles just overwhelm beginners with too much stuff. So ideally you'd want like a separate beginners class or a separate beginners course that was just for beginners, is super relaxed, super friendly, not a lot of technical detail being taught, just kind of working through the basics, more about getting to know the instructor and the other people in the class, building relationships, building friendships, and then progressing people into the more regular class after that. So those are kind of like the main things, but there's literally 20 different things that instructors do that drive me mad when beginners walk into their school. And this is why a lot of schools don't grow to, 100, 200, 300, 500 members, because the instructors can't remember what it's like to be a beginner. So they can't remember that fear and that stress and shall I, shan't I? Oh, this place looks scary. Oh, there's loads of people beating each other up over there. No one's come to talk to me. Oh, I'm in a class. I don't know what I'm doing. I'm looking stupid. Oh, someone's just punched me in the face. This sucks. I'm not coming back. So some instructors would be like, well, they shouldn't be such a bunch of useless people. But other instructors are more like, okay, yeah, we need to kind of teach in a way that gets people in and gets people through that tough learning in the first 3 months. Because the first 3 months of learning martial arts is tough. You don't know what you're doing. You don't know how to stand. If you're doing jiu-jitsu, you're getting smashed and tapped non-stop. It's tough. So there needs to be like in our school, we had like a TLC program, Tender Loving Care, 3 months of supporting people through that initial 3 months where, most people quit during the first 3 months of martial arts. So if you can keep them past the first 3 months, then you're onto a good thing, because they tend to stick around for a couple of years after that. So yeah, lots. Yeah,
I like it. A little bit of TLC to keep people engaged is always a good idea.
But if you want a school that's more than 25 members and not full of killers, if you just want a school full of killers, then obviously you're going to get loads of fresh meat in, and if you survive the milling, then you're a fellow killer, and then you'll move through and you'll get better. That's fine. But if you want to grow a school that helps people in your local community and can help people from 5 years old up to 95 years old, then it's not about milling, destroying, killing and all of that. It's more about just helping people become the best versions of themselves. So it all depends on what your goals are as an instructor.
Yeah, definitely. I'm in an agreement with you there. And I also seem to have touched on a sore point with you. So I got to dig a little bit deeper of like, what would you say? Let's just keep it then to top 3 of the other things you think, or just top 1 even, because I'm sure it seems like this is a passionate point of yours that you think that instructors do wrong or could do better.
I think some instructors are annoyed by beginners. It's like, oh, another beginner. Now I've got to teach them how to stand and how to move, or what pain in the ass. They're not going to stick around anyway. But that attitude obviously doesn't encourage beginners to stick around anyway. So that would be part of it. You've got to kind of love teaching beginners, and beginners are hard work. Like, we'd all rather train with elite athletes who just get it and are just awesome and, express and can do amazing things, but they started as beginners as well. So it can be a bit of a pain in the ass, and a lot of instructors don't really enjoy that. So that puts beginners off. I think you need to describe the journey that they're going to be going through, so that you pre-frame them, that they're going to have these milestones and these barriers and these hurdles and how to overcome them, because generally we just don't do that. We just leave them to it. You're in the class, off you go. If you survive, great. If you don't, see you later. So I think pre-framing them on like their journey through martial arts and the stages, and if they do belts, how the belts work, and if they don't do belts, their progression and what they're going to get from it, telling them how they're going to deal with things like muscle soreness. I remember having a client, beginner, did like 1 or 2 sessions, and then we didn't see them, and we were like, phoned them up, got in touch with them, and he's like, I think I'm dying. And we're like, why? And he said, all my muscles hurt. Like from the top of my head to the bottom of my feet, because he's never worked out like that intensely before. And we're like, no, you're not dying. That's just normal muscle soreness. You take some ibuprofen, you take a hot bath, it'll go away in a day or 2. And he's like, oh my God, I thought I was really, really ill. So it's like there's people out there like that who maybe never worked out hard, and just, so you've got to help these people get through these hurdles and explain about muscle soreness, give them routines for stretching, give them plans for nutrition, tell them how to deal with the inevitable hurdles. First time they get punched on the nose, first time they get submitted by someone a lot smaller than them. All of these things are going to happen along their martial arts journey, but you need to pre-frame them and explain that they're normal. Things like plateaus, you know, in your beginning 6 months to a year of your martial arts, your skill level shoots up like that. But after 2, maybe 3 years, it starts to plateau. You need to pre-frame your people on that, because it's another reason why they might leave at a later date. So it's just thinking about the entire journey from total beginner opening the door to martial arts school to black belt or beyond. What's everything they need, they've gone through, and how can you help them overcome the issues, the steps, the hurdles, the pains, the frustrations? That will make you a better instructor, and it will build your school.
Yeah, I really like that, and I'm in agreement with you there. I guess it's the idea of, instead of forgetting or just ignoring the own struggles that you may have gone through to get where you are as an instructor, or just being perhaps unaware of it, is, you know, noticing what struggles you went through yourself, noticing that that's probably going to be a universal experience with everyone, and then using your experience to help guide or pre-frame, as you said, what, you know, a new student could expect to go through, and then kind of giving them the, the helping hand along the way, which a good instructor should do, right?
Yeah, but it's not something that you maybe need to manually do. As you know, I'm big onto online learning and courses and things like that. So you could create a welcome course. Martial arts instructors could create a welcome course for their school. So it's something that someone signs up for a free trial. Maybe you then send them the welcome course that welcomes them to the school, introduces you to all the instructors, shows you the facility, shows you where to change, shows you how to tie your belt, shows you how to put your hand wraps on if you're doing kickboxing, boxing, and then kind of explains the journey of, you know, you're going to do this class and this is what's going to happen in the class, and you're going to be safe and no one's going to kill you, and you're going to feel a little bit sore, but that's perfectly normal, and here's some stretching routines to help you. And then just like step by step in this online course could be the next 90 days of that person's journey into martial arts. And what it does is it removes all the fear for people, so they're more likely to show up for trials, they're more likely to sign up. It makes people feel more comfortable, makes them feel valued. So I'm a big fan of that type of thing. So it doesn't have to be manual. You don't need to like speak to every person and explain it. This can all be done digitally. And for those people that don't need it and are just like beasts and naturals at martial arts, they just come in and they do their thing. But for that 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, maybe 70% of your school that's maybe not natural fighter material, probably 95% actually on most schools, then you need this kind of journey. So online is a good way of delivering that.
Yeah, I certainly like that as a way of saving time as well. I have a background in IT, so any chance where we can just send someone the link to read a problem is much easier than having to explain it ourselves, probably multiple times, the same thing. Especially, you know, you can predict what kind of questions are going to come up. So I very much like that idea.
Yeah.
And one of the main skills or that people might have to learn when going into a martial arts school, especially when doing kickboxing or boxing is, of course, the skill of holding pads. And, you are the Mittmaster, holding mitts, I should say. So I'm wondering then, how do you, for beginners, even just holding pads itself can be somewhat daunting. There's obviously people's arms start flying everywhere and they have to get used to even that. And, when they get paired up for their first time, if they have to hold pads in a kickboxing class, that can be an unwelcoming experience themselves.
Yes.
So I'm wondering how you go about dealing with that issue.
Good question. I try to avoid it initially. I don't really think total new beginners really should be holding pads, at least for the first few sessions. Ideally, I want them doing stuff in lines so that I can spot the anomalies in the lines. So that's a good thing about the traditional martial arts. If everyone's lined up and doing the same thing, you can spot the person who's doing something odd and then give them a bit of advice. So that helps. And then I generally prefer bag work initially because, it's a stationary target. It's pretty easy to hit. We can coach them while they're hitting. There's no danger of people holding the pads badly and getting injured. So maybe first few sessions, limit it. But yeah, when they do get to the point of holding mitts, I prefer them to isolate a single technique in a static position. So we don't do any footwork. We just get them basically holding the pads, for example, for a jab. And we really coach them on, correct pad position, because a lot of people just hold the pad any old way and their hands totally relaxed and then they get hit by the hand, which we've all done, right? So we're really like, no, make sure your elbow's down, make sure your hand is in line with your shoulder, make sure you're slightly tensing at the point of impact, and when we build them up slowly, we don't let people wail on the pads hard initially. They've got to show control and technique maybe on the bags first, and then we transition them to the pads. But yeah, isolated and immobile generally. Isolate one technique, keep them immobile on the spot, no footwork because that usually messes things up, and then add another technique once they've got the first technique, and add another technique, and then consider it adding in a little bit of footwork, possibly a little bit of head movement, and you're off to the races. Then it started to happen. I
like it. So that gradual introduction that you recommend with the rest of the martial arts, you still recommend with the mitt work yourself, which I guess makes sense that it's an encompassing philosophy of TLC.
Yeah, it's just one of the most important things for instructors is you want to avoid your students getting injured within the first sort of 2 months or possibly 3 months. Because as soon as someone gets an injury at martial arts, they're usually gone. It's really hard to get someone back who's kind of just started their journey, got injured, and then they're impossible to get them back. So we want to minimize chances of injury, which means we want to minimize certain techniques that we're doing. We wouldn't, for example, do plyometric exercise with beginners. We wouldn't do certain deep stretches with beginners. And I certainly wouldn't let them hold Thai pads and let people kick it full force, because they have no idea what the amount of force that's about to come through the Thai pads into their elbows. So it's all about looking after you have a responsibility to your students. If you know a student's not really ready for holding pads, then you shouldn't really have them holding pads. Or at least you should be monitoring it closely. So yeah, it's a progression. We want to try and progress people through martial arts. If we don't take care of the beginners, we don't get any decent elite level fighters, black belts at the other end. We have to help people through the journey.
Yeah, that's an interesting point that I want to ask your opinion on then, is that kind of nurturing of the beginner, which you mentioned would be seen as, from some, a different mindset that you should be just, raising a room of killers, that it's not really what it's all about kind of thing. Do you still think that if you start off with that nurturing atmosphere, that the killer could still emerge from that crop?
Oh yeah, the killers are always there. They're always there. They're just, you're taking better care of them as well, so that they because the killers are the ones who just tend to injure each other and rip each other's arms and legs off, and they don't really mind. They're fine. They just carry on, turn up with their arm in a sling. So the killers are always there. You're just taking better care of them as well, So I don't think it's a problem. It's more for nurturing the rest of your group. So if you say had 100 students, I would say probably only 5 of those are real kind of fighters who have the passion for fighting, whatever style of fighting, who, have the drive, the determination, the physicality, the emotional instability to be a fighter. So what are you going to do with the other 95? Do you just get rid of them, or are you going to teach them anyway? And in my opinion, the other 95 are kind of more important. The fighters are going to be fighters regardless. It doesn't matter. They've got it in them. They will learn the skills they need the hard way, and they will battle their way and be dominant. They're that type of person. But the other type of people need help. So really, I'm more interested in serving them. Fighters are great at a point in your journey, I think, as a coach. But after time, you kind of get fed up of dealing with prima donnas, and fighters are sensitive. They're physically really strong, but they're quite sensitive individuals, and they take things really personally, and they take things to heart. And so you have to kind of baby your fighters. And after a while, after a decade of doing it, or 2 decades, you're just like, I've had enough. I just want to teach normal people who appreciate what you do, who don't want to rip your head off, who don't want to be treated like a king, who don't feel like they own the gym. So at least in my case, I would much rather teach that type of person. But it's different for each coach, right?
Yeah, I think it's understand that side of things as well. And I guess it's just really going to come down to those goals, whatever the coach really wants to achieve, and making sure that they're aligned with those goals so that they're really delivering the experience that they believe in and want to, whichever one that may be.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I mean, I know a lot of coaches who train fighters, and they love it and they hate it. They love it because it's just nothing better than taking raw talent and turning it into a world-class, fighter who can dominate and win. That is really like an amazing feat. But the other side of it is, fighters are very selfish. If they're not getting what they need from you, they can just drop you and just move to another team, move to another instructor, which I actually think is a good thing. Like, I always encouraged our fighters to go and train with other teams if we couldn't give them what they needed. Like, we've had fighters who are 100 kilos plus. There's no one 100 kilos in the gym for them to spar with. So what are we supposed to do? Strap a small person on my back and spar with them? No, you've got to find other big fighters. So we always encouraged our fighters to go and find what they needed externally. And we weren't really obsessed with winning titles and being a fight team necessarily. So it's a bit different. But it can be hard. And, also fighters tend to injure their coaches quite a lot. Not intentionally. They're just in ridiculous shape. I remember watching a documentary about Ricky Hatton's coach, and he used to have to inject himself in the wrist with anesthetics before holding pads for Ricky, because his joints were so bashed up from Ricky hitting him so hard. And you're like, oh man, that's the life of a coach. And then Ricky, I think at some point, dropped him and found a different coach. So it's like you get brutalized by your students and destroyed, and then they discard you when they no longer need you. It's tough being a fight coach. So maybe not for me, but some people obviously love it.
Yeah, that is tough. That's tough love.
Yeah.
It starts off with TLC and then with a bit of tough love, I think.
Tough love, yeah. It's hard. A lot of coaches, have to do a lot of controlling the egos in the room, right? Because a fighter gets good, they win fights, they win a title, they get a call from a big promotion, and then their ego's like, I'm the most important person here, and I decide what goes on, and that's hard to deal with. So yeah, it's not easy being a coach for sure.
Yeah, and then of course then that leads to a detriment of the 95% of other people in a gym as well.
Yeah, it's really hard to take care of normal people and to take care of fighters, and the two should never mix, because the fighters will just run through the normal people and break them all up and smash them and spit them out and be bored, want to fight each other. So yeah, I never mixed them together. Fighters had their own training, their own sparring. We never introduced those people, because they're different animals, literally totally different animals. It's like pussycat versus a lion. It's that type of thing. So you've got to be careful. Also, a thing we did was we never let the normal people see the fighters spar, because fighters training like MMA, we trained a lot of MMA fighters. MMA fighters training for fights, they're kicking the crap out of each other hard. There's a lot of contact. There's often blood. There's a lot of swearing and people getting slammed. And, if you're not used to that, that's mega intimidating. So we never let the normal folk see that side of the training unless they wanted to go into that world. So just a tip.
Yeah. I guess that is a huge thing because talk about pre-framing. If that's if people get the expectation that is what every sparring session is like, especially if a pro is getting ready for a fight, then that can certainly give the wrong impression or just lead to bad habits.
Well, this is what happened. We had, a sparring class followed by a beginner's MMA course in the evening. And what used to happen is the beginners for the MMA course used to come during the last 15 minutes of sparring. And the gym was like wet from sweat from the fighters training, and it was steamy and it stank as fighters stink. And there was blood on the mat from where someone took an elbow, and there's people just in piles on the floor, just sweating and dripping. And then you just get like a normal person come in and they're like, it's just not, they don't need to see that. You just keep that bit away from them. So we actually had a few people like go white with fear, because like if you think about people who come to want to do martial arts, it's usually because of some sort of insecurity, or they need something that martial arts can give them, and that's usually to do with self-confidence, self-esteem, confidence and ability to defend themselves. And if they see a load of MMA fighters kicking the crap out of each other before their class, they're going to think that's what they're going to get, and it just gives them a massive adrenaline dump and they're terrified. So yeah, we stopped that.
Yeah, that sounds fair. That sounds fair. Or, good to at least have the option to be able to do that, I would imagine. And I mean, one of the things that, bringing it back to the beginning, that made me familiar with your work is, of course, the pad work, in particular the MMA pad work that you would do. And I'm wondering then, in that process of training fighters, especially when you talk about how difficult it can be to hold the mitts when someone's absolutely launching baseball bats at you, how did you go about developing your MMA pad work drills and sequences, or kind of what holes did you see that needed to be filled within MMA pad work?
So 90% of the pad work I do is from Erik Paulsen. I've just put it together in different sequences and combos, but it's his stuff, essentially. And then what I did is I've got quite a photographic memory for martial arts techniques. So I can remember techniques that I did 30 years ago, and then I would be able to slip those into combinations and add them in. So it's like accumulation of all my different martial art styles all put together in the pad work. But training fighters, I would do certain things to make sure that I didn't get injured. I generally wouldn't train fighters who were much heavier than me because of the impact you're going to take. I would pre-fatigue them to a degree before I got them on the pads. I wouldn't have them on the pads fresh. Usually they do maybe bag work, some clinch work before they get on the pads, and then we could refine technique because they weren't trying to swing and, take a chunk out of me. I made sure I had lots of rest between fighters. I didn't go back to back holding pads for fighters, and make sure they had decent equipment, and I used air pads. I'm a big fan of air pads. Those are pads with like an air chamber in the middle. They seem to soak up more impact than any other type of focus mitt I've ever held. It doesn't matter which company you get your air pads from, but I do like Rev-Gear's air pads. I think they're the best ones that I've personally used, so that's a recommendation. But they really helped me not take too many injuries. I made sure I was properly warmed up. I made sure I did rehab and prehab on my shoulders and my elbows. Any sort of pain afterwards, I'd instantly ice and maybe rest it. So you've got to take care of yourself as a coach, because a lot of people are relying on you. But as far as the MMA pad work goes, most of it was from Erik Paulsen, and most of it he'd already developed. He's got more drills than you've had hot dinners. It's just like he's forgotten more than most people know in a lifetime, literally, and he doesn't forget much. So he would teach me a particular sequence on the pads, and I'd go and drill it, train it, spar it, fight it, and then tweak it to make it like a little bit my own. So that's where most of my MMA pad work came from. Yeah,
I believe that. He's certainly a resource of knowledge. And with the MMA pad work, of course, it's not ground and pound pad work or grapple boxing pad work, clinch pad work. Often we just associate that with pads with striking, Muay Thai, kickboxing, everything like that. What did you see as some of the difficulties then when you started or obstacles to overcome when doing, pad work for ground and pound or working on the ground, combining it with takedowns, things like that?
Yeah, it was difficult because we used to hold Thai pads a lot, and Thai pads just make grappling impossible. They're too big, right? Obviously, they cover your entire forearm down to here. They're thick. So they're all right for the striking, but you can't really move Thai pads fast enough either. I'm much more a fan of focus mitts because they can be moved into quick combinations. Thai pads are just a bit too heavy to get into position quickly. Great for developing kicks, obviously, knees and elbows, but not so much for the boxing and the MMA. So then we moved to smaller type focus mitts, still air pads, but kind of smaller. And we would start, obviously, because all MMA fights start standing. So we start with standing striking, but kind of modified for MMA. So different stance, different positioning, being able to defend the takedown, start with long range striking, get into mid range, into knees, elbows, clinch. And then even when we got in the clinch, sometimes we would throw the pads off. So we'd throw them off and actually then clinch using like proper meat hooks and move our partner around and try and then get into more of a grappling side. But sometimes we keep the pads on and still try. There's still a lot you can do with pads. You can't use your thumb, obviously, but you can kind of Muay Thai clinch with pads on. You can control biceps. You can duck under. You can grab legs and try. And so we would kind of continue to the ground, and then we'd integrate all the ground and pound sort of stuff using the pads on the ground as well. But I think transitioning from Thai pads to smaller air mitts was key. And occasionally they come off, but we just carry on. We just, let them hit one pad, or they hit us, or we just grapple on the ground if the pads have flown off. It's not ideal, but you kind of have to make do with what you've got. There's an American guy called Roski who has created a MMA pad, which is quite unique. I've got a set, and they're quite interesting. They're like a focus mitt, but they don't have like a back covering on the hand. So you kind of hold a ball. So imagine holding a ball with a focus mitt in front. And the person can hit the pads normally, and the pads are secured to your wrist like this. So you've got this ball thing you're holding, they're secured to your wrist, and you've got a pad. Well, the advantage of that is when you're hitting the pads, you can then just flick the pads down so they're hanging from your wrist, and you can grapple and carry on. And then you can flick them back up and hit pads. So if anyone wants to check those out, they're called Roski MMA pads. They're pretty cool. They allow you to do a lot more stuff in terms of grappling with striking combined.
Interesting. Yeah, I'll definitely have a look at them. And I think that even, highlights the area of MMA pad work that is underdeveloped in just the fact that there is invention of new pads to even facilitate it from being possible, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I'm surprised they're not more popular because they are a useful tool for coaches. They're quite small, so they force people to be accurate. They mean you can do everything you do normally, stand up, but then you can also very easily, like, you can grab people's wrists and control wrists, like this, because the pad is resting against your forearm. So you can be pushing and pulling, trying to pull people's heads down, put them in a triangle. You can grab a kimura when you're an instructor. So it makes it a lot more realistic. So, yeah, there should be an evolution of focus mitt for MMA. And I think things like that are coming along as the art evolves and it gets more and more and more popular.
Yeah, which brings up, I guess, that just the combination of the different arts into mixed martial arts and how you then go about structuring certain syllabus. And when you are thinking of combining MMA with your Muay Thai or wrestling or Jiu-Jitsu training, do you have those considerations in mind when designing other syllabus, or what are the things you're paying attention to when keeping the MMA syllabus in mind?
I tend not to keep the MMA syllabus in mind. I like to separate out the arts. So I've got, for example, boxing syllabus is kickboxing, Muay Thai syllabus is Filipino and MMA. So if you want to combine, then you need the MMA syllabus. But if you just want to box, then the boxing syllabus is for you. I don't really think you can combine them because, for example, the MMA stance is very different from a boxing stance, which is very different from a Muay Thai stance. And the mechanics of power generation are slightly different. And, there's a lot of head movement in boxing. There's not much head movement in Muay Thai. So they're separate sports. It would kind of be like trying to combine soccer with rugby, with snooker. It just doesn't, they're different sports. They need different approaches. So I tend to keep them very separate, apart from MMA, which I teach in a blended approach. Obviously, all MMA fights start standing. So I think you start with a standing base and understanding range and how to move within the cage, control distance, and get your long range striking. But then it very quickly transitions to the person who has dominant wrestling, tends to control where the fight happens. So then it's about kind of wrestling and then looking at the ground and submissions and ground and pound after that. So that's the sequence I like. If you don't have a striking base, you're not going to be able to prevent the wrestler getting hold of you. The only thing that stops wrestlers coming in is good counter wrestling and knees up the middle and uppercuts and frames and stuff. So that's how I prefer to do it. But of course, different coaches have different ways of teaching their material. So yeah, I tend to keep each art separate. I tend not to blend them. And I think people prefer that. Boxers have no interest in really learning anything from MMA. They consider boxing to be the superior striking system. Muay Thai people look down on kickboxers because they don't kick each other in the legs and elbow each other in the face. So you just find your own thing that you're into, really, don't you?
Yeah, definitely. Whatever art you are doing is generally the one you believe to be superior, which is the reason why you're practicing it, I suppose. Bit of human nature involved in that one. And so then in the syllabus design, because you do have, multiple syllabuses that you have developed, I guess we already have touched on some of the things you would make important for the beginners, but what are the main focuses that you think that goes into making a good syllabus?
Ooh, that would require another 3 hours, which we don't have. But I would say
let's go.
Most instructors build their syllabus the wrong way. They build it like a pyramid. So at the base, they tend to have lots of techniques, which then overwhelm beginners. And at the peak, they have few techniques, which means their advanced students get bored. So they're overwhelming their beginners and they're making their advanced students bored and not challenged, so they tend to quit. So you've got quitting at both sides. What I tend to do is an inverted triangle. So mine is like that, the other way. Very few techniques for beginners to learn because we want them to have early success and feel confident and competent as quickly as possible. And then as they move through the syllabus, it gets wider and deeper and there's more depth. I see this in martial arts schools everywhere. It does my head in. I go in and I see what they teach their beginners, and I go in and I see their syllabus for their first few grades, and it's like hundreds of techniques. I'm like, how is someone training 3 times a week supposed to get hundreds of techniques and feel good enough to grade? And so, for example, in my kickboxing syllabus, there's like 6 techniques for the first grade, which to most instructors is just a joke. They're like, how can you give someone a belt when they've learned 6 techniques? But it's more, for me, about the journey of the person towards elite level or black belt level and not about the early grades. If I give them early success, early win, and don't overwhelm them, then they're more likely to progress through the grading syllabus and get better and better and better until they're then black belts where I can show them all the jazzy stuff. So I prefer to keep first few grades really, really simple. They should feel like, oh, that was easy. Not, my God, I'm overwhelmed and this is so hard, and fail, because often that's what happens at other schools. They fail their beginners, which I get. Tough love and all of that. You got to deal with failures being a martial artist. But I'm not really interested in creating great beginners. I'm interested in creating great black belts and beyond. So I want to get people to the point when they're like of a decent skill level, so then I can show them the really cool stuff. So yeah, I prefer syllabus like that. A lot of martial artists teach it like that, and it's a bit of an issue.
Yeah, I think it's kind of similar sometimes with people with instructionals. They have an idea of that it's going to be like the Matrix. If we just put as much stuff in there, people are just going to master it immediately. And it would be great if people can. And, you would likely, you will find some people who can do it. But, yeah, I think you're right. And just, if people just focus on the basics or the fundamentals, which I think not many people would disagree with that. and get good at those, then it's going to build that competence, build that feeling of satisfaction that they're good at something, and then that can fuel further training.
Yeah, but at least with instructionals, you can go back to them and watch them again and again and again, and take as long as you need. There's no timeline. Like when you buy a jiu-jitsu instructional, you've got it for life, and you can watch it over a period of 2 or 3 years and really get it down if you really wanted to. Classes are different. There's gradings that will be happening. There's pressure from other people, instructors wanting you to move up. So you've got to kind of support your students and create a syllabus that serves them, not serves you. And often martial arts instructors are kind of like, I want to show you everything I know because I love martial arts so much. So here you go. Bleh, and they just brain dump and technique vomit 5 million techniques onto a beginner who's not ready or able to comprehend that. So better to just give them small little bites, build them up gradually, get them better and better, get them falling in love with martial arts, move them through the belt system, which is still important. I think belts are important. They hold up your pants, but also they are signposts to levels of skill if they're used correctly. So, a BJJ black belt should be a pretty effective beast. It doesn't matter if it's a BJJ black belt at 25 or 65. They should, have their fundamentals down, right? So BJJ obviously has really respected black belt, whereas maybe other martial arts don't necessarily. So all of this is part of the argument for gradings and not gradings, and when people get their belts and when they don't get their belts. But it's an interesting journey. I think black belt still has a lot of credibility, and earning a black belt is still a special thing, but there's levels to this thing, obviously.
Definitely. And I think that, kind of the external reward of gradings still have their purpose in giving motivation for people to continue and stay in the sport, and no matter what that is. And I think you'll often find people in sports without that belts and grading systems often wondering, would it be a good thing to bring it in, because that could possibly help their sport grow. So it's
this is exactly why I created an MMA syllabus, because I was having people obviously wanting to train MMA but not wanting to get in a cage and get their face elbowed in, which is fair enough.
Yeah,
these are normal people who have normal jobs. They can't risk getting their shoulder dislocated or going into work with a scar on their head from a fight. So I was like, how are we going to serve these people? Because they're not going to compete. They probably don't want to teach MMA and be coaches. So I did levels. I didn't really do belts, but there was like MMA level 1, MMA level 2, all the way up to 10. You didn't need to be of any level to fight. It was more just a progression so people could see where they're at along their journey. But it's not like I'm a black belt in MMA, which doesn't exist. It was more signposts and progressions, and also made teaching easier because, for example, if I had 3 different groups and I knew they were 3 different levels, I could teach them different things. There's nothing worse than like having novices and really experienced people in the same class. What do you teach that keeps them both happy? So it just allows the instructor to tailor the lessons a little bit more effectively to the students, and students get better. Also, students can go away and look at their syllabus and go, okay, I need to practice this. I can drill this on the ground and pound bag at home. I can rep these out. I can practice my shots. So they have something structured to learn from when they're not with you in the school. It just seemed like a no-brainer to me. All other martial arts have a grading system. MMA is mixed martial arts. So why is there not a structured grading system for MMA? So I created one. Obviously, Eric's got his own one as well, but I created my own kind of version. And it proved really popular with the people who weren't going to fight. Fighters don't care. They're just going to punch you in the face.
Yeah.
But normal people kind of like it. Now, does that make it a little bit like, I've got my belt in MMA? I guess that's up for instructors to decide what they want to do in the school. The thing is, if you own your own school, you can do what the hell you like in your school, right? And I just like helping normal people really progress, and syllabuses help people progress. It gives them a structure, gives them formal steps, gives them a timeline, a time frame. I think that's useful teaching tools.
Yeah, very, very much so, just to, have those steps that they know they can go through. I was, I guess, lucky in that where I was training with Anthony Lang, even for our MMA or shoot fighting, we had the different grades, different levels, which was from John Will's system. So I was always familiar with that. But you're right. At the time, grades didn't matter. It was just getting in there. But I think just even having that internal club grading system, as long as it's, known that it's a recognition of merit within the club that can then be a denotion of skill, I think that's obviously fine, even for Muay Thai or kickboxing or something like that. And if the club then has a good reputation, then it can mean something outside of that itself. Because I know that, people in some places that have the internal grading system, if they've got good martial artists, then it does mean something that you've spent the time there and earn the skills and respect a coach.
Yeah, if you're producing high quality students and high quality instructors and good people, more importantly, and you're producing, if you want, fighters who are performing well, it's a win-win, right?
Yeah.
Everyone gets what they need,
Exactly. And I guess one thing then I'll ask about the syllabus design leading into gradings is you kind of mentioned, the more techniques as it moves into the more advanced stages. What do you see then as the big change from the beginner into kind of that intermediate or advanced level and the ways to deal with that in a structure?
For which system? For MMA?
Yeah. Let's stick with MMA. Or I was thinking just, generally just on the learning curve, but in particular then MMA.
Yeah. Well, for example, for MMA, transitions get smoother. You know what it's like working with a beginner. They're going to do some punches, then they're going to change levels, then they're going to shoot. And so it's very staccato and it's very broken up. And as you get better and better at MMA, the transitions become smoother and the gaps between the techniques disappear to a degree. So I think that's one of the things that happens as people progress through the syllabus. Obviously, physically, they get used to the demands of MMA. They get better used to those. Their mind also begins to think more strategically. Beginners don't have any strategy. Well, their strategy is survival. If they're lucky, they survive. But as you get better and better at MMA, you start to think tactically and strategically and start to try and impose your game plan on your opponent and negate their game plan. So all of these things together, just increase in technical skill, execution tends to be sharper. So that accumulation of all those things happening together at the right time is what creates, a decent martial artist. And it's the same for any syllabus, really. It's the internalization of the principles and the techniques of the system so that they become one with the person. Bruce Lee was always going on about, become one with the technique and that is it. Elite level martial artists are not consciously thinking physically about attack or defense. They're thinking strategically usually, and they're letting their body do the rest. So their body is trained to a point where the technique will happen if the opportunity is right. But what they're thinking is, how can I position myself to be at an advantage? How can I fake and feint? Where can I direct this person so I can limit their options? So they're thinking strategically while their body's just operating. And you see that in jiu-jitsu, obviously, things are happening and they're not even conscious that they're doing them. They're expressing their martial arts and they're obviously trying to strategically win the fight. So all of those things together, I think, creates a good martial artist. But the journey is personal, meaning there's no set timeline. I know people who've got their jiu-jitsu black belt in 4.5 years, and I know people who've got their jiu-jitsu black belt in 15 years or longer. It's a personal journey, and I think that's good as well. It takes as long as it takes. We were never like a belt factory martial arts. If you weren't good enough to get the belt, you never got to grade for it. So we'd always pull people before the grading. I'm not a big fan of public humiliation. People failing in public can be useful for egomaniacs and dickheads, but I'm more a fan of, if I know someone's not ready and they're not going to pass their grading strongly, I would just go up to them the week before and say, we don't really think you're quite ready yet. We'll do a quick half-hour private review to show you what you need to train on. You can do the next grading in 5 months' time. So that kind of solved that problem. But yeah, it's a personal journey, right? And it takes as long as it takes. And the whole thing for me is you learn all the great stuff after black belt. Black belt's just prep. or getting to black belt is preparation for the real journey. I believe a black belt is someone who's mastered the basics of their art, but they don't really have any advanced skill, which is contrary to what a lot of people think a black belt is, as like a master of martial arts. But you're not as a black belt. You know, in any system, when you get to black belt, you realize, I don't really know anything. I better get a lot better. So, yeah, that's the journey.
Yeah, 100%. I hear you there. And I think we've covered a lot of topics, and especially, very interesting your thoughts on the nurturing of beginners and the advice that you would have for business owners. And one thing I know that you obviously have your Mittmaster website that has resources, and one thing you have on there is also resources to help academy owners to set up online stores themselves and courses. But maybe could you give us more of an idea of what that covers, and does that cover to the kind of what you were talking about with the nurturing of beginners?
Yeah, so we are evolving as martial artists, right? And coronavirus and the whole COVID lockdown accelerated that evolution. So I remember sort of 25 years ago getting VHS tapes. You remember VHS tapes, where you would put them in the machine and I'd watch martial arts training from various instructors. And then that changed to DVDs. And now it's online courses. It's the evolution of learning. And martial artists have so much to give. We spend decades honing our skills, decades getting great at something, helping people. And we need to, in my opinion, put that into a digital format, because that digital format will last forever. The problem with teaching classes is you might have taught the best class you've ever taught tonight, but as soon as you finish that class, it's gone. It's just disappeared, right? It's no longer there. It's like now you have to go back tomorrow and teach again, and it may not be such a great class. So I'm a big believer in recording digital content, because that stays around forever and can be shown for generations and can be shared with your students, your instructors, your family. I think that's really, really important. So what I do is I help instructors create online courses for their business, things like online syllabuses, things like welcome courses for their martial arts school, all with the goal of just making learning easier, more effective, more efficient. And I think you're going to see this evolution of teaching where people are going to learn more and more online. The Jiu-Jitsu community is already massively into learning from instructionals. Other parts of martial arts, less so. It's not so popular. It's getting more popular, but in other martial arts, it's people are not so keen to learn online, more of the traditional martial arts, but it's getting there. And the whole thing they say is, well, you can't learn martial arts online. And I'm like, you can, but it's not as good as learning it one-on-one with an instructor. Everyone knows that. That's not what we're saying. We're not saying it replaces an instructor. We're saying it supports the instructor. It supports the development, and it allows an instructor to teach more people. For example, with Mittmaster, I have students all around the world, Japan, Australia, New Zealand, America, Canada, South America, Africa, who are all learning like my pad drills from online resources. I couldn't teach all these people personally. I couldn't fly around the world and deliver a class to these people. So it allows me to share my passion with more people and help more people around the world. And then if people really want to train with me, people fly in to train Mittmaster stuff with me. So I think martial artists do a very underappreciated job, and one way of supporting them is helping them create these online resources so that they can build followings and tribes outside of their school. Because the problem with a martial arts school is it's geographically limited. It's your town that you're in, and that's the max number of people that you can teach in any day, right? So you live in a town of 10,000 people, that's the max number of students you can reach. But of course, of those 10,000 people, only 200 actually want to learn martial arts. So so you might be the best teacher, most passionate, most infused, excited teacher, but that's the maximum people you can reach. With online, you can reach out of 7 billion people, right? In which case you're going to find a few 100,000 who are really into what you do and how you teach and your passion for the martial arts. So part of my thing is I'm constantly encouraging instructors to create online resources, but they're very fearful and they're very resistant. They have three primary fears. They're fearful of the technology. They're fearful of trolls, people saying mean things about them on the internet, and they're fearful of imposter syndrome, that they're not good enough to create online courses because there's always someone better out there than them. So I spend a lot of time like a therapist counseling instructors, going, don't worry about it. Trolls are going to say mean things about you. Just ignore them. The tech is easy now. You can film on your smartphone and upload onto whichever platform you like and get stuff out there. It's super easy nowadays. And the imposter syndrome is an interesting one, because there's always a better martial artist than you out there. But what you got to understand is it's more about your journey, your passion, your way of expressing what you've learned in martial arts that people resonate with. So you'll find your own crowd, you'll find your own tribe who just go, wow, I love how you teach. For example, jiu-jitsu, some people love how John Danaher teaches, and some people can't stand how he teaches. He's found his own niche. He's found his group of people who just love listening to him teach and his conceptual approach and how he speaks. They love that. Other people like it does their head in. So it's the same for every instructor in the world. You can create your own group, your own tribe, your own passionate followers, and share your message with more people, but also make possibly more income than you're making from your martial arts school alone. So it's got so many benefits. I just wish instructors would man up a little bit, or woman up a little bit, and actually start doing it, because it's very powerful.
Yeah, definitely. And I have to laugh. I think I'm constantly doing battle against those three objection points that you mentioned yourself. But we might have to save the therapy session for another time to work through those. I get my wins. But
I'll book you in. We'll do it now.
Yeah, I think you make a good point. I'm obviously even myself, I've got stuff online, and of course, and work on it. But it's still sometimes record something and have that feeling of there is something better out there, which is a common one. Better. And sometimes justify it. As always, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes justified, a good class is like a sand mandala that's just, built to only temporarily last and fade away. And, it gets washed away at the end. But then also, it is good to use the tools of the greatest technology that's been available to mankind to help more people and spread your message as such. So.
Yeah, well, my thing is, if you have a gift, I believe you have a responsibility to share your gift with the world, and not hide it away, and not be fearful, and not be overly humble. If you have something special to offer the world, you should be out there, pushing it out there, and promoting it and marketing it and getting it to the right people who can benefit from your gift. So that's kind of the way I see it, and that's the switch that needs to happen in instructors' heads.
I really like it, Matt. Well, it's been an excellent conversation, and it's a good point to leave it on with there. Nice point to finish up with. So if people do want to find out more and check out your courses, what are the best ways for them to go about doing that?
If they want to learn pad drills, go to mittmaster.com. If they want to learn how to set up online courses, go to teachyourpassiononline.com. If they want to have a chat, hit me up on Facebook, Matthew Chapman, and we can have a chat about all these different things. But people can find me if they want to find me.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for your time today. Really enjoyed the chat, and hopefully we can do it again in the future.
That'd be awesome, dude. Nice chatting with you. I like your questions. They made me think. It was good.
That's the goal here. That's the goal. Thanks so much, mate.
Thank you, dude.
Cheers.
You have been listening to the Sonny Brown Breakdown. Until next time, you can visit sonnybrown.net to find out more ways to break it down.